It is 1930, and Germany is at war with France. The fighting is brutal, but the French are saved by a heroic leader. General de Gaulle leads his men in a bayonet charge, proudly fighting for France and beating back the Teutonic hordes. This never actually happens. It is a story written for school by a 15-year-old boy named Charles de Gaulle. Even at this young age, de Gaulle sees himself as someone destined to save his nation and defeat the German foe. The real history of the leader of Free France will not actually be that far off. Welcome to another World War II in real-time biography special, where I take a closer look at the major or interesting figures of the war. I'm Indy Neidell. Born in Lille in 1890 to an upper-middle-class family, de Gaulle grows up in a time of great political turmoil. Firmly nationalist families like his are still bitter about the traumatic defeat in the Franco-Prussian War in 1871 and the resultant establishment of the French Third Republic, a regime that considers itself the heir to the French Revolution, and its values of secularism and liberalism are anathema to the de Gaulle's Catholic and royalist ideas of what France really should be. Charles, as a teenager, decides to pursue a military career, and in September 1909, at the age of 18, he passes his entrance exams for the École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr. He graduates in 1912 and joins the 33rd Infantry Regiment as a second lieutenant under the command of Colonel Philippe Pétain. His devotion to military service is sincere. In 1913, de Gaulle gives a speech to his men telling them, "Nothing more awakens in a people male virtues and noble enthusiasm than the sense that the fatherland is in danger. While prolonged peace provokes the love of gain and the appetite of vice, war develops in men's hearts much that is good." Well, just think how awakened his male virtue must have been when the Great War broke out in August 1914. His service during that conflict is impressive. Wounded 3 times, he sees action at the Battle of Verdun and spends over 2 years as a prisoner of war. He frequently attempts to escape so that he can get back into the fight. And when peace comes in November 1918, he is full of regrets that he was not able to do more to serve France. Like so many soldiers of the Great War, his experiences affected him deeply, and afterwards he often sinks into moments of deep pessimism. Something decidedly unchanged about him is one of his deepest held beliefs. In April 1919, he travels to Poland on an official advisory mission. When passing through Germany, he writes to his mother, "The Boche, especially in Prussia, watched us with expressions which were filled with fury and hate, but they were careful not to say anything. So deep are the feelings of defeat and fear into which they have sunk." So, still not the biggest fan of Germans. He settles back in France at the end of 1920, marries in April 1921, and begins preparing to enter the École de Guerre to study strategy and tactics. But once there, he finds himself clashing with the instructors and is openly disdainful of their dogmatic theories. Nevertheless, he graduates in October 1924 and is posted to the occupied Rhineland to supervise supplies for the French army. Having already published one book, he is building a reputation for himself as an outspoken military thinker. In July 1925, now Marshal Philippe Pétain appoints de Gaulle to work in his private office. De Gaulle does also return to his duties in the Rhineland in October 1926 and is promoted to commandant there in September 1927. Okay, Pétain wants to use de Gaulle as a ghostwriter, specifically for a history he plans to publish on the French army. And the young officer is somewhat of a protege to Pétain, but he has always been fiercely independent, even in the face of his superiors. And the relationship becomes strained when Pétain hints he will involve other writers and will not properly credit de Gaulle. It's the beginning of a breach between the two men, but for now they remain close. In 1929, and on Pétain's advice, de Gaulle takes up a bureaucratic posting in the French Mandate for Syria and Lebanon. In 1931, he returns to Paris to serve in the General Secretariat of the Supreme War Council, and his career will now slowly transform. He's been somewhat apolitical so far, unorthodox and controversial, sure, but his audience has been confined to the small world of military men. But he now begins publicly criticizing the underlying assumptions of French military doctrine in a potential war with Germany, arguing that it is too reliant on a static defensive position, as if things would be a repeat of the Great War. He believes that the army needs to be professional, mobile, and mechanized. This means it's restructuring in a way that many of France's politicians are pretty suspicious of. They much prefer a conscripted popular army, don't like the idea of a professional one, which has the potential of bringing down the Republic. So his military doctrine is already politicized, and once his book on the matter is published in 1934, he begins looking for powerful voices to carry his ideas. He develops a close relationship with a politician called Paul Reynaud, a fellow maverick who makes political interventions on de Gaulle's behalf. Both men are strongly opposed to the government appeasement of the belligerent Nazi Germany. But by mid-1937, de Gaulle's political interventions are running out of steam. He stays in contact with Reynaud, but leaves Paris to take command of the 507th Tank Regiment in Metz, promoted to full colonel by the end of the year. In 1938, he kicks off his last big controversy before the war starts. He wishes to publish his book, France and Her Army, a sweeping history of the French military, but it is based on the ghostwriting he had done for Pétain the previous decade. Pétain insists de Gaulle leave him a dedication stating, "To Monsieur le Marshal, who readily helped me with his advice." De Gaulle says, "Yeah, okay," but writes instead, "To Monsieur le Marshal, who wished this book to be written." Pétain is furious at the slight, and the two men's relationship is over. But they soon have bigger things to worry about. The Second World War breaks out in September 1939. De Gaulle is transferred to command the tanks of the Fifth Army. Germany invades in May 1940 using the kind of blitzkrieg strategy he had already argued France should use. He commands his tanks well during the fighting and is promoted to brigadier general. Despite significant objection from the deputy prime minister, Marshal Pétain, Reynaud, who is now prime minister, brings de Gaulle into the government on June 6 as Under-Secretary of State for National Defense and War. The Nazi onslaught is becoming unstoppable, but de Gaulle insists France must fight on, undertaking several missions to Britain to coordinate further resistance and meeting British Prime Minister Winston Churchill multiple times. But it is in vain. Marshal Pétain becomes prime minister on June 16th expressly to declare an armistice. De Gaulle flees to Britain. It is from there that he becomes the famed leader of Free France. He has built a rapport with Churchill, who allows him to make a BBC address on June 18th, declaring that the flame of the French resistance must not be extinguished and will not be extinguished. It's powerful stuff, but not many people actually hear it, and he is still a relative nobody. In fact, the British government only recognizes him as leader of the Free French after failing to get higher-ranking politicians or generals to London. He also has a lot of trouble recruiting Frenchmen to his cause, especially after the British attacked the French fleet at Mers el-Kebir. By the end of July, he has rallied a mere 7,000 men and only a few officers. No top ambassadors or politicians have joined him, nor have colonial governors in Syria, Indochina, or North Africa. However, he does manage to get French Equatorial Africa on his side in August. He then sees defeat in September at the Battle of Dakar, a joint British Free French operation where Vichy French forces show that they are willing to fire on their own countrymen. It is such a failure that de Gaulle considers suicide. His task is truly daunting, but despite the darkness, he is determined. He considers himself the only man who can save France, and he has no desire to just play a supporting role in the war. Instead, he plans for France to emerge gloriously as a victorious Allied power, saying to a British general, "You think I am interested in England winning the war. I am not. I am only interested in French victory." This ambitious and admittedly arrogant mindset makes him few friends in the British government, and it will always be a troubled relationship, but his prestige will slowly grow in the coming years, and his efforts will gain mounting recognition. He will take part in the ever-increasing Allied victories as the war drags on. Sorry for the spoilers, we're still only in 1941 at the moment. You will be able to witness these events as our regular series continues. For now, I'll leave you with something he will say in 1944 when invited to proclaim the Republic to the crowd gathered in liberated Paris. "It is unnecessary. For the Republic has never ceased to exist. I was the Republic. If you would like to learn about French resistance in the early stages of the war, then have a look at our War Against Humanity video on the topic. You can click on it right here. You can also click on subscribe to never miss a World War II episode. See you next time.